The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to Cyber Reason webinar, AI Hunting in Action. My name is Lital Ashadotan and I'm VP of Security Research and Content here at Cyber Reason, and I will be your host today. Thank you for joining us. We're very happy to have with us Shlomi. Shlomi, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Shlomi Avivi. I'm VP of Information Security in Cyber Reason. As part of my job, I'm also managing a managed services team, and we're going to talk about one of the incidents that the team has revealed recently.
Thank you, Shlomi. So welcome to our webinar today, in which we will have a deep dive into a real incident that services worked closely with a customer a few weeks ago, not too long ago. It is really important for me to state that everything, all the information that can identify the specific organization was anonymized. We will not talk about the specific organization, its size, or which industry it belongs to. So please don't ask us specific questions, as we cannot disclose this information. But we would like to share with you the information of how this attack happened and how we were managed together with the customer to investigate and close the information. If we go to the next slide, let's go through today's agenda. So we'll talk about the specific case. We want to take you through the attack life cycle and show you how, with some hunting techniques coupled with the right technology, you can detect a full-blown attack, not just through one stage of the attack, for example, not just finding a malware, but rather unveiling the whole operation throughout the attack lifecycle. Shlomi will take you through this. We will talk about the hunting and investigation process and techniques that the team was using. And at the end, as always, we'll summarize it and provide you some tips. So for those of you that use the Cyber Reason platform, and also for those of you that are not our customers and want to do it by yourself in the tools that you have in place, give you some ideas of how you can use it yourself. Really important to note, we want this to be as interactive as possible. You have a chat box in the bottom of your GoToWebinar console. Feel free to type in questions. We'll try to leave room at the end of the presentation to answer all your questions. And if we will not have enough time, we promise you to go back and send you answers. We will circulate the answers to all your questions through email. So without further ado, Shlomi, the floor is yours. Let's talk about this specific incident.
Thank you, Lital. So first of all, some sort of background / context / framework of what we're going to talk about. So the attacked organization was a Cyber Reason customer using the Cyber Reason platform deployed on its servers and endpoints. And as we will shortly see, that was actually the trigger for identifying the initial indication of an attack. Second thing, the customer had several security tools, several layers of security tools on the endpoint, on the network, and as we'll see later on, we'll talk about later on, none of them spotted anything related to the attack. So it's not that they were completely open and that's how the breach happened or the attack happened. They had security controls in place. And the third thing is that our analysts, our services team, perform investigation and hunting only based on the Cyberism platform, and everything you're going to see here, or every part of the investigation that you're going to see here was done on the Cyberism platform. That's kind of an indication of the capabilities that the platform can provide for hunting teams. Okay, so before we dive into the details of the case, I want to briefly go over the attack lifecycle schema. Now, this schema is, I would say, true to most of the advanced attacks that we see. It's not about specific tools or specific I don't know methods, but it's more around the flow. So there are many ways to perform penetration and lateral movement or data exfiltration, but in most attacks we see that there are these phases. So let's go over it a bit, and then we'll see how or which of these phases we encountered in this attack. So when an attacker wants to perform an attack, usually he has a goal. The goal is some internal resource, be it data that he wants to extract or steal, or damage that he wants to cause to some internal resource. And so for that, when we're talking about advanced attacks, usually there is a phase of external reconnaissance, where the attacker is learning the organization, learning the victim, understanding who are the key people, what types of technologies are in use, what types of security controls are in use, and so on and so forth. And that helps him prepare the right tools to perform the attack. Then there is the penetration phase, where the attacker wants his malicious code to run on a machine in the organization, and that code is supposed to provide the attacker with a level of control to continue and dig in further in their environment. Now, after the attacker has established a foothold, a spearhead, one or more compromised machines that he can control remotely, then he starts looking around and tries to understand what is the best path to get to the resource he initially set as his goal. And that these phases include internal reconnaissance, understanding how to move within the environment, performing lateral movement until the attacker eventually gets to the goal he set. Our case starts with a compromised user. The first indication we had was about credentials being compromised, and let's see how it looked on the customer side. So this screen is from the Cyberism console, and it describes a Malop, what we call a Malop, or which is short for malicious operation. As you can see at the top of the screenshot, the Malop is credential theft, which means that our system has identified that there was a behavior indicating some program, some process trying to dump and steal credentials. Now in the screen we have basically every context we need to start doing investigations. So we see we have the processes that were involved, or the executables that were involved. We have the machines that it happened on, so we kind of can see a flow of an attack, or where it started and where it went to in terms of timelines, like chronological timelines. And we can see you can see further details, for example, which users were used and so on. So this alert popped up at the customer console, and the customer has asked us to have a deeper look. And the reason they asked it because based on that, they couldn't really tell if this is a local thing, if it's just someone who ran something bad on his laptop or something, or if it's something wider with a much more critical effect. And so we started looking, and what we start doing when we get an alert such as that is first we're trying to understand which are the processes that are involved. Now here, if we once we dive deeper into the processes, we can see that the process that was involved is called unpack200.exe. And we can also see the command line that we used and the switches that were used that triggered this alert. Now, first of all, we're trying to understand what is unpack200.exe. Is it a known malware? Is it something we can pinpoint easily or not? And then to understand what exactly it tried to do that triggered this alert. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, the suspicion was Mimikatz-like behavior. Now, for those of you who are not or less familiar with the Mimikatz tool, it's a credential dumping tool, very common. And what it does is usually it extracts credentials from the operating system, usually by dumping certain parts of the memory related to certain operating system processes. So we started looking, as I said, we started looking at unpack200.exe. Now, a simple Google search showed us that unpack200.exe is an Oracle, actually a Java tool used to unpack jar files. Now, that is a certain indication, but not a strong one, because, you know, as you can imagine, you can rename any file to be called unpack200.exe. And that's why we are looking at other indications. And the stronger one of them is the file signature. Because usually software companies digitally sign their files in a way that makes it, I wouldn't want to say impossible, almost impossible to fake. So if we want to understand the level of authenticity of the file, that's where we're going to check. So here, to our surprise, we found out that the file is signed and verified by Oracle, which means that it is indeed an authentic unpack200.exe. So that was kind of puzzling, because if it's an authentic file, how come it's behaving like Mimikatz? So we've continued looking, and looking at the command line. As you can see, this started ringing a bell, because these switches, we know them actually from Mimikatz. So what we have here is an exe, an executable that looks and by all indications is not a malicious executable, running Mimikatz kind of command line and behaving like Mimikatz. And so this is kind of the situation that we saw from the very initial investigation. And here it's important to kind of note that you know, to a less trained or an untrained analyst eye, this could easily look like a false positive or bug, because again, the file is authentic and is a commonly used tool. So it could be dismissed as a false positive. We had a bad hunch about it, so we continued looking. And the question that we had is, how did the attacker get, and assuming that it is indeed a Mimikatz-like tool, how did the attacker get this non-malicious executable to behave like Mimikatz and to perform this operation. So we started looking deeper, and in our platform we can dive a few steps deeper. And what we looked at is the DLLs that this executable was loading. Executables are often relying on common packages of code compiled in DLL files for reusing or performing basic operations. So DLLs can be part of a software package. It can be part of the operating system, and so looking at DLLs that this executable was using, we found out we had this list, and one of them kind of stood out as different. As you can see, there are two parameters here, two characteristics of DLLs that we can see. We can see if it's signed or not, and we can see the path that it's running from. Now, OS DLLs are always signed. So the fact that this one was not signed rang a bell, and the path also looked weird because most Windows DLLs are located in the common Windows DLL folders. The main one, I guess, is C Windows System 32. This one is running from C Windows temp /work folder, which is strange. And so we decided to focus on this specific DLL. So looking at it, and according to its name and Googling it, this is a Visual C++ runtime DLL, which means that programs written in C++ would normally use it. And we also looked at its reputation. We looked at VirusTotal, where a lot of the malicious files and samples are being submitted. And what we found out was that this file was only submitted once, not long before the attack or before we investigated this attack. And out of the 66 engines that scan files submitted to VirusTotal, only one detected it as malicious, the rest did not. Now, what this tells us is that if this is indeed a malicious file, malicious code, then it's something that is not commonly, it was not commonly used. It was not used a lot prior to this attack, because if it had been used, we would have seen it in VirusTotal more than just with more than just one submission. And so this also kind of pointed us to assume that this is more of a targeted and advanced attack with tools that would probably created for this attack. Now the question still remains on how did this all join together to perform the Mimikatz operation using the Java Oracle exe. Now, given this context, our guys, our team, reached the conclusion on what was the attack method used by the attacker. It's called DLL search order hijacking. I'll explain it in very few words because I don't want to go too technical here. But basically, as we said, executables use DLLs. Now, when an executable wants to use a DLL, it needs to look for it somewhere around the operating system, around the machine it's running on. And so the way that it works is that the executable would first look for it in its own folder. So if the unpack200.exe was in a certain folder, it would look for DLLs first of all in this folder. If it did not find it there, it would continue looking at in a certain order in a list of operating system commonly used DLL folders. Now the weakness here is that the search is only done by name. There's no deeper verification of the DLL. So there's no hash checking, there's no signature checking, nothing like that. So for me as an attacker, if I wanted a legitimate executable to run my code, all I need to do is to pack it as a DLL and rename it as a DLL that executables would use and place it higher in the search order. In this case, place it together with the executable in the same folder. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, looking further into this DLL and doing a bit of reverse engineering, we could also find another interesting piece. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we found a condition within it that says that if it's not being run by unpack200.exe, it would not do anything, it would just exit. And the reason for an attacker to do that is to keep the operation more stealthy and avoid being detected, because if it did not do that and some other executable would run the code in the DLL, and due to that would generate some unusual output or unusual behavior, someone might notice it and start looking and start understanding why it happened. Here, the attacker knows that no other executable would cause its DLL to do anything, so no indication would pop up that he didn't want to pop up, and only if used by unpack200, then would the malicious code, the Mimikatz code, run. And again, this is an evasion tactic that we see from time to time. So up until now, it's very clear to us, to the team, that this is an actual attack. It's a sophisticated one. It's probably targeted at this customer, and is used to steal credentials of users. And not just to complete the full picture from the attacker side, when stealing credentials of users, he actually has the ability to access everything that they can access, and with very little suspicious indications in other security monitoring systems. Because eventually, if you think about it, if someone has your own password to your own machine, then they can do whatever you can do, and it would be very hard to differentiate between them doing it and you doing it. So this is what the attacker was going for access that these users have. Now, so we understood how the attacker did it, but for the attacker, he wouldn't want this to be done each time by an active user. I mean, because eventually, if he got the user to run his code once by a phishing email or by any other method, then that would give him something. But usually, what the attacker would want is his code to run all the time, regardless of any user intervention. Or in other words, he would want persistence. And so we started looking, understanding what is the persistence method used by the attacker in this case. So what we did is a process tree investigation. Again, all use cyberism platform. And here, what we have is the hierarchy of processes. Which process has spawned up which other processes. And if we go back in the process tree, we can see that unpack200.exe was ran by CMD, which is the Windows command line utility, that was run by task eng. And now task ENG is the Windows task scheduler. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with it, the task scheduler is an administrative tool aimed for automating IT-related actions. So a system administrator can put some command or some script in a scheduled task, set it to run at a certain time, and Windows would run it for them. In this case, the attacker used this operating system mechanism to run unpack 200.exe at a certain time, regardless of any user intervention. So this was the persistence mechanism in this case. Now, so we know now how the attacker was operating. We know what was keeping him or keeping his code running all the time. Now, what we need to know in order to scope this this incident is to understand who is compromised. I mean, which machines were compromised? What is the extent of the foothold of the attacker in the network at this point? And so we ran a query looking for scheduled tasks that are similar to the one that we found on the compromised machine. So we looked for scheduled tasks with a similar name and with a similar command line. And what we found was 16 compromised machines, 15 servers, and 1 workstation. Now, this also gave us another indication as to how the attacker possibly have penetrated the network, because as we see, there are many servers here, which means that the attacker has probably penetrated the network in a server's segment, possibly by some vulnerability in a server that is exposed to the internet, causing it to run its code. And then, when moving around in the attacked environment, he would first see servers around him, and after that, he managed to move to another segment and has infected the workstation. And the second thing about scoping it is to understand what was the order of infection and who infected who. And so we ran a query about connections between the infected machines. And what we found here was very indicative. We found one machine that was communicating with all the others. And what this tells us is that this is probably the foothold of the attacker in the network. He has this machine, this server, compromised. From this server, he controls his actions. From this server, he's looking for other resources in the network, trying to compromise them and trying to get whatever he can from them. And so we decided to look further into this compromised machine. So just to summarize up until now, so we started with credential theft alert. Now we know how it was done. We know the scope in terms of who is compromised within our network, and we know the order by which the attacker has moved. So we started looking further into the attack, and the next question we asked ourselves is, how is the attacker managing this whole operation remotely? Because if we want to mitigate the attack successfully, we don't only need to clean up what we found, we need to make sure that the attacker cannot continue infect machines in the network. So what we would want to find is the attacker's command and control line and cut it. And so what we're looking for again, is some sort of compromised process or some sort of tool that would allow the attacker to access the foothold machine whenever he wants and to operate through it. So we started digging into this specific compromised server, and this is what we found. Since we knew that the attacker was using scheduled tasks, we decided to look at all the scheduled tasks on this server, and we found another interesting one beside the one that we've seen before. And this one is a scheduled task, again named test. Probably he chose to name the test to kind of throw over any IT person trying to look for something abnormal. And this schedule task is running an exe called ccse update.exe. Looking at this process as we've done before, we found out that this is a Symantec process for updates that is also signed and verified. So again, we see the attacker using signed verified tools, which means that he knew that an antivirus or any other signature-based security mechanism would not spot it as malicious, and using it and causing it to perform malicious operations. In this case, the way he did it was a bit different. He did it through a way called dealer reflective loading. Now, I don't want to go too much into the details of how it's done, but basically what reflective loading is doing is loading a DLL, as we've talked about before, but loading it not from the disk, but from memory. Which means that if I, as an investigator, would like to understand what is this vtcp.dll or what's in it, I will not have any file that I can investigate because it was not loaded from file. And this is also a common way for attackers to hide a malicious payload. Now, looking at this specific one, we found out that vtcp.dll was part of an open source RAT or remote admin tool, and so we understood that what the attacker did was use this RAT, this tool, managed to get the Symantec authentic process to run this the DLL of this RAT, and this way the attacker could get the capabilities that the RAT gave it, which is, by the way, anything from running commands, downloading and executing of files, basically getting the full control over the compromised server. And so we continued looking at what this ccse update.exe did, understanding that this was the process used by the attacker for command and control, and we found out that it was using or it was communicating to a specific domain that was only registered 5 days before the attack. Now, this obviously is, first of all, not a common behavior from an actual and a genuine Symantec tool, but it's also an indication that even the attacker did not use infrastructure that he had already. Sorry, but he actually created the infrastructure for this attack, registering domains, probably setting up servers for the command and control, as long as together with customizing the tools as we've seen before. Continuing into the investigation of this specific server, we had to look at the folder that you've seen repeatedly throughout the attack, the C Windows temp/work. And there we found a bunch of executables. Some of them were named to look legitimate. Some of them were not. And checking their hashes, we found out that they are all part of a reconnaissance tools repository, something that can be found on the internet. And so what these tools gave our attacker is the ability to look around once he has a compromised machine, understand what are the machines around him, what weaknesses they have, in order to use these weaknesses. Now, one more point I want to talk about here about this command and control operation is that if you can see, the attacker gave it some extra thought and did not use the same process, the same Unpack 200 for the command and control connection. The reason for that is, since he wanted to stay below the radar, he needed a process that is expected to go online to initiate connections to the internet. Unpack 200 is not, in its nature, is not supposed to do that, but an update process that is supposed to go out to the internet and download updates is definitely expected to do so. So he chose this tool, thinking that even if someone was to look at the list of processes going out to the internet, they wouldn't think this is abnormal. Now, getting back to the attack lifecycle, as you remember, we started with a compromised user alert, but we kind of managed through going by this lead to uncover a few more steps in the attack. So we found out the persistence mechanism and the machine that was the foothold of the attacker. We found out how it did internal reconnaissance and internal movement or lateral movement within the network. And we also found out how the attacker was controlling the operation remotely. And so, summarizing the technical findings here, so we know that we uncovered that there was indeed a targeted attack using customized tools and specially prepared infrastructure to support the attack. We know that the attacker was aiming at users, trying to gain access to what these users have access to. We know that there were 16 machines compromised, and going from that, we can also list the number of users that whose credentials were cached in these machines and are compromised as well. So using that, we came up with a list of users that are suspected to be compromised and need to renew their credentials. And we also revealed that the attacker was using a disguised rat tool to control the attack from remote, and we also found out which IPs and domain names he used for that. Now, given these findings or the context that they provide, we could also go and do the mitigation or recommend to the customer how to do the mitigation, because we knew which are the files that needed to be blocked or blacklisted or to not ever run in the system. We knew who are the users whose credentials were compromised, and mitigating or taking out the control of the attacker would be done by replacing passwords and credentials and keys for them. We knew who were the machines that were infected, that required further forensics deep dive to determine if they can be cleaned up or just need to be formatted and reimaged. And we also found out which IPs need to be blocked on the network level to not allow the command and control to a connection to be established. To summarize from a defender's standpoint, I think there are a few takes that we can take from this incident. The first one, targeted attacks are designed and planned to be silent. You will not see a lot of alerts coming from everywhere if you are hit by such an attack. As we've seen here, we only found one lead of this whole operation who continued for weeks. We only found one lead of it, and in only one tool. We didn't see anything in any other security tool. We didn't see in our system a lot of alerts coming from it because the attack was very well planned to be very, very silent. So this is something that to put in mind. Second, the traditional security controls are good for detecting malicious tools and for fighting the tools that have already been recognized as malicious. They do not know to detect the new threat, the upcoming threat, the future threat. And the reason is that usually these tools are based on these controls are based on the tool rather than the behavior. And one of the things that we see all the time is that the tools keep getting updated, keep evolving, keep getting better. The behaviors are the same. Eventually, if there is a credential theft in your network or some sort of other malicious behavior, it doesn't matter if it's called Unpack 200 or it's called virus.exe. It's the same. It's the same behavior. And so what we see is that focusing on the behavior is a must in order to detect and face new attacks. The third thing is that it is crucial to follow an attack through and do the full investigation on it in order to mitigate it. For example, here, if we stopped at finding and cleaning the infected machines and we would not deal with the command and control connection, then the attacker could simply compromise more machines right after we finished cleaning them. So here you have to do the full investigation. If you're under an attack, you have to do the full investigation and the full remediation to make sure you're clean. Doing part of the work doesn't really cover you. And I think three tips that I think we should all take for the day on our day-to-day as defenders. First of all, our analysts need to understand these new methods of attack. They need to know how attackers work. They need to know what are the weaknesses that are being used out there in the wild. And this is a learning process that needs to be ongoing and never ending. Because eventually, if an analyst who did not know about the DLL search order hijacking would have seen the evidence that we have seen, I'm not sure if he would know how to continue or how to identify what exactly is going on. So our analyst needs to be always on top of the new techniques and new tools and new threats. Second, alerts are being triggered by every security tool, and in every security tool, including ours, there are cases of false positives. However, that does not mean that we can easily dismiss alerts as false positives just because it doesn't add up. If you see an alert and something doesn't add up and you're not sure, it's your duty to perform the needed investigation to be very, very certain if this is a false positive or not. And the third tip is about the threat handling approach. Now, what we've seen here is that from this whole attack, as I said before, we only had one alert that was triggered. So if we, as defenders, would only take the reactive approach and say, okay, we've seen an alert, we'll deal with it. Let's wait for other alerts to tell us what's going on. If we've done this, if we had taken this approach, we would be losing the battle. It's very important to combine the reactive approach of dealing with alerts that are being triggered with a proactive approach of searching for threats and hunting for threats within your environment, regardless of the alerts. That's it for me this time. Litan?
Yes, thank you, Shlomi. Thank you for everyone that has sent us questions. You're more than welcome to continue sending us questions. I think we have a few really good ones. So let me start so we can squeeze as many as we can. Shlomi, somebody is asking, what is a good source to stay up to date with advanced TTPs?
So it's a very good question. And basically, there is no one source. What we do is our analysts have a certain time frame within the day where they have to do where they have to update and do research. So they find the blogs and articles and the websites that post security incidents, and they try to get. Sometimes it can come from seeing something on a news website, and then from there following the links until you get to someone who publishes a more technical deep dive of it, and you can learn from there. A good source to start with would be security companies. Security companies, and we are no different here. When they find out a new type of technique or have revealed an interesting incident, usually post blog posts on it or articles, and some of them really go deep dive technically. That would allow you to also learn from it and improve your abilities internally.
Excellent, thanks, Shlomi. Technical question about the incidents we've just seen. How did the threat actor got hold of the credentials in the first place? Do we know that?
So in this case, we did not find the penetration vector itself. We estimate, based on the findings that we've seen, that I would say this. In most of the cases that we see, the penetration is done through social engineering to a user. It's a phishing email. It's a fake website. It's a USB stick that was inserted. One of these vectors. Here, since we have seen more servers infected than workstations, our current assumption is that it happened through a web server that was open to the internet and that was vulnerable to remote code execution type of exposure. But we don't know for sure from the data that we have.
Okay. If sophisticated cyber hackers can spoof a common use tool or vendor command set, is a tool or well-trained analyst the best way to identify and prevent a malicious attack, or is it a combination that requires the optimal approach?
A very good question, because as you can see, I mean, they fooled legitimate executable. What could we do? I mean, it's really kind of it can be very it's a very difficult situation to be in, where everything can be malicious. So what we do, what we recommend is, first of all, and we kind of spoke about it in the latter part. First of all, focus on behaviors, okay? Because eventually the behavior of being malicious, be it credential theft or data exfiltration or any other malicious activity, code injection, whatever, the behavior would always stay the same. Even if they found out a new way that we couldn't even imagine to get a legitimate tool to do something, eventually, if we're looking to find the behavior, we would find it. So that's one part of it. But the second part is a combination between the behavioral detection abilities, usually coming from systems or security systems or platforms, with the right capability on the analyst side. Because as we've seen here, the system only gave us the first lead. After that, the entire hunting process is something that the analysts had to do based on their hunches, their knowledge, their understanding of how attackers work, and their understanding of the methods by which attackers can try to avoid detection and to try and bypass that. So the answer is, it's a combination of both that need to be very strong.
I have two questions that are really a little bit more related to the Cybereason platform and the way it handled this specific investigation. So somebody is asking, did this particular event led your solution to generate a template or something that will be repeatable automatically to interrupt future similar attempts?
Yes. So yeah, we have, first of all, as you can see, we have spotted the malicious behavior. There were a few alerts. I don't know if you managed to see it through the presentation, but the command and control part also triggered an alert that was not handled or was not given was not given enough priority or severity by the customer, but it's there. So our platform definitely identifies it, and I can also say that we continue to evolve it, because we know that the attackers are also evolving, and we cannot stay in one place. We have to evolve as well. So we are always evolving based on incidents we find, and by the way, based on incidents that others find and that we can analyze and learn from.
So the answer is basically yes, we evolved the product to be able to detect it automatically and not just be based on an analyst proactive hunting, even though this will always be needed for more advanced techniques. Another interesting question, does Cybereason product has the capability to carve out fileless malware, for example, the VTCP.dll, the one mentioned in reflective DLL technique?
Yes, so we have various modules aiming for detecting and even preventing fileless malware attacks. We have a whole module for detecting malicious use of PowerShell, which is a very strong method of fileless attacks, and we have several others. So yeah, the answer is yes, and we also see that fileless is becoming really the commodity tool in for some attacking groups. So we are definitely putting a lot of efforts and focus on always evolving our abilities over there as well.
I have a very good question from, I guess, a CISO in the audience. How do you qualify having the staff spend time to analyze false positive? You mentioned before that false positives are important, not to be dismissed. When they have little time analyzing even the actual threat alerts, how much time should be devoted to this type of false positive analysis? Is it 5, 10, 20% of analyst time? What would be your thumb?
This is really an excellent question. It's really touching on my personal pains as a CISO. But so I don't think we can like put a number over there, because it's really different. The false positives are different between one another. What we are doing is, first of all, the better you train your analysts, the faster they will find out of false positives. That's one part of it, and it's I'm saying it in one sentence, but it's a big thing that needs to be done all the time. Like, our analysts now are very trained on on the attack landscape that we're looking at, the endpoint side, and they can find false positives rather quickly. The second thing is to tune the tools you're using. And I can give an example from our tool. We have the ability to whitelist a specific behavior. So, for example, if you're using, and we've seen that this quite a lot. Let's say that you're using some internal tool, maybe an IT tool, that is behaving like a malware. Okay, it's using impersonation of users in a way that that is malicious in any other case. But you know that it's your own homegrown tool. Then we have the ability to whitelist it, so that this behavior, once if it's good enough to spot it as a false positive one time, and it would not pop up again. So our continuous efforts on the environments that we manage for our customers is to reduce the number of false positives, so we don't have, ideally, we don't have any false positive that pops up more than once. If it pops up, you found out that it's a false positive, fine-tune it and whitelist it, the behavior, I mean, not the tool. But yeah, it's again, the same here. It's always it's an always ongoing process. There's no final and decisive solution to get rid of false positives altogether.
Excellent. And with that, I believe we're running out of time. We have a few more questions that we didn't have, unfortunately, the time to answer. So we will be answering them in writing, and we'll circulate it among our participants. This webinar was recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording. We really appreciate you for joining us today. Thank you, and we hope to see you back again in one of Cybereason's webinar. Shlomi, really, thank you for sharing all those insights about this incident.
Thank you, Lital, and thank you, everyone. And I hope that we've helped you guys to be more secure in the future.
Thank you. Looking forward for having you again with us. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.